Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday, aka second Monday. Although I will say, I think that Tuesdays are significantly more enjoyable whilst we are at home and can be in our comfy clothes. Yeah. So today's lesson, I think, is going to be really helpful to you guys. Looking through your ACT journals, make sure you got it turned in, by the way. But just looking through those journals and some of the comments that you guys were making and reflecting on, it seemed like one of the biggest struggles that we had was with commas and how to properly use them. So hopefully you'll find that this lesson is really helpful, and you're going to definitely learn some stuff. It is a little bit of a longer lesson, so I'm just going to dive right in. And at the end, I'll talk about what your homework looks like and a couple of other quick announcements. So here we go, diving in with commas. So there are a number of rules that we're going to go through. And as always, this along with the Pear Deck like live version, so you guys can kind of move through the Pear Deck and answer the questions at your own pace, is posted on Google Classroom. So just so you guys know that this is all there for you. But we're just going to talk about a couple of rules that you guys need to know when it comes to commas. So rule number one, this one we're super familiar with. This one's an easy one that I don't think many of us mess up, is we use commas to separate items in a series. Okay, so for example, Mrs. Berg's favorite foods are tacos, nachos, and ice cream. I can't make myself any smaller, can I? Ooh. All right, well, I'm just going to move myself way far down. Okay, so Mrs. Berg's favorite foods are tacos, nachos, and ice cream, right? We use the commas in between, ooh, fancy. We use the commas in between each of the items in the series, and we always include this comma before the last item with the conjunction, and that's what's called an Oxford comma. So I want to talk to you guys about Oxford commas really quickly. So the Oxford comma is the comma that comes before the word and at the end of a list, like I just said. Okay, so this comma right here would be the Oxford comma. And I do have a short little video for you guys that talks about the Oxford comma debate. I don't want to play it here on this video because I'm afraid it's going to get like weird with the sound and stuff. But I would recommend you guys open the notes and play this video right now. So if you pause me, go to the notes, play the video, and then come back here. So that's just some debate on what people have. But for purposes of this class, the Oxford comma is always necessary. Okay, I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma. I think it helps kind of avoid confusion in a lot of sentences. So I always expect you to use it. All right, comma rule number two is we use commas before coordinating conjunctions in a compound sentence. Now, we talked about compound sentences, right? That's when you have two independent clauses that are joined together. And one of the rules that you can hook those together with is comma coordinating conjunction. So one of the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Now, remember, there are two other ways that you can hook together two independent clauses to make that compound sentence. But this is one of the ways that you would want to use a comma for. So there would be an example of that. Oh man, you guys can't see my cool emoji. I'm moving myself up here. There, I don't think I have many Bitmojis up top, so we'll just do it like that. Okay, so here would be an example of that, the comma coordinating conjunction but to join these sentences, these two independent clauses together to make a compound sentence. Again, that's a pretty common one, although I do see some of you making that mistake on your essays especially, I noticed. We just would include the conjunction, but we would forget to put the comma there. So just kind of be aware of that one. And then I can get this to go. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, comma rule number three. So we want to use commas after an introductory word, phrase, or subordinate clause that comes at the beginning of the sentence. So anytime you have any sort of introduction that comes before the main clause, before the independent clause, you have to offset it with a comma. So use a comma to separate an introductory element from the main clause that follows. So in order to be successful, comma, one must learn to write well. So this is an introductory phrase in order to be successful. And so we need a comma to come before the independent clause, one must learn to write well. Okay, so anytime you have any sort of introductory phrase or even a word, there's a lot of words that serve as introductory phrases, especially those conjunctive adverbs like however, therefore. If you start a sentence with any of those, you need to include a comma after it before the clause. Don't use a comma if the clause or phrase comes at the end of the sentence, however. Okay, remember, these are the two ways to hook up subordinate clauses and independent clauses. You can either put it at the beginning with a comma, or you just put it at the end and no comma needed. So her grades improved after she learned to use commas correctly. Okay, so we know that this is a subordinate clause, this underlined portion, because it starts with a subordinating conjunction after, then it has words. It has a subject and it has a verb. Okay, but we could also do it here. One must learn to write well in order to be successful. Okay, we could just take this introductory phrase and tack it on to the end of the sentence. No punctuation needed. So just make sure you're understanding kind of how each component in your sentence is functioning, whether you have an independent clause or you have some sort of additional word, phrase, or subordinate clause, and just know the rules for how to hook those up. Okay, so here are some practices. Now, again, remember, I have the Pear Deck posted on Google Classroom for you, so you can just pull the Pear Deck up and practice these and then come back, and I'm going to talk through the answers right now. Okay, so you might want to pause me, go do the practice, and then come back. So what we're supposed to do is you guys just have draggables. You've got some draggable commas to insert here, and you're supposed to insert them where they belong in this sentence. So if you read the sentence, I want to learn to ski, to swim, to play basketball, and to play cricket. Okay, so we have all of these items in a series. We have all of these infinitives in a series, so we need commas after all of them. So you should have a comma right here. I want to learn to ski, comma, to swim, comma, to play basketball, comma, and to play cricket. Okay, you need that third comma there, remember, because that's the Oxford comma, always required in my class before the last item in the introductory or in the series of items. Okay, this next one. I want to learn to ski and I'd like to learn how to swim. So this one, you need a comma after to ski because what we have here is we have two independent clauses. I want to learn to ski. I'd like to learn how to swim. Those are two independent clauses. They can stand alone, but one of the proper ways to hook them up, remember, is comma followed by coordinating conjunction and. So we do need a comma between ski and. Here's another one. If you look closely, you can see the intricate beadwork. Okay, so this one is an introductory phrase. If you look closely, no, that's an introductory clause. Excuse me, that's a subordinate clause. Okay, so we need a comma right after closely. Okay, because this is an introductory element coming before the independent clause. You can see the intricate beadwork. So we need a comma there. Again, we could take this introductory clause, this subordinate clause here, and we can move it to the end of the sentence, no punctuation needed. We could say, you can see the intricate beadwork if you look closely, and that would be completely fine. But since it starts the sentence, we do need that comma right there. Okay, so moving on to some more comma rules. So comma rule number 4 is you need to use a comma to separate elements of dates and places. So this one's pretty straightforward. You may just need a refresher on it. So here would be an example of a date. The date was June 12th, comma, 1999. So anytime you have like two different numbers next to each other, you need to include a comma between them. Or if we were to have like a day of the week before the month, like Monday, June 12th, then we would need a comma between Monday and June. Okay, so anytime you've got like two words of a date or two numbers of a date next to each other, they need to be separated by commas. You do not need to put a comma between word and number of a date. Okay, so just know we don't need a comma between June and 12. That would be incorrect. And then you also need commas to separate places. So you need it between the city and the state. Okay, and the state really needs to be offset by punctuation on both sides. So you can see we have two commas here. We have one before Minnesota and one after Minnesota. Okay, if the sentence ended in Minnesota, obviously you don't need a comma before the period. But since Minnesota is in the middle of the sentence, we need commas on both sides. Okay, so really what you're doing with places is you're putting commas around the state. Did I say date? I meant state. I don't know. It's early. All right, so he was born in St. Cloud, comma, Minnesota, comma, during fall would be the appropriate use of that comma rule. Comma rule number 5 is we use a comma before a direct quote in a sentence, and most of you are really good at doing this. So I do want to note this because we are still struggling with this a little bit. Commas and periods go inside the quotation marks. So here's what I mean. Okay, when asked if he had studied for the test, Paul replied, comma, okay, we need a comma before a direct quote, and most of you are pretty good about using that. Now, the only thing I will say is when we're doing lead-ins in an essay, if your lead-in leading up to the quote is a complete sentence, if it's an independent clause that can stand alone by itself, then you would need a colon here. Okay, but if it's a fragment without the quote, like if it's leading into the quote by saying, the author said, or the author stated, the author exclaims, something like that, then you would need a comma here before the quote. So then you have the quote. Now, in this instance, we have some of the sentence coming after the quote. So you do need a comma after the quote before the quotation mark. And this applies to periods as well. So if the quote that you're using in an essay is the end of your sentence, then you need to put the period after the word before the final quotation mark if you don't have an in-text citation. If you have an in-text citation, then we know the period goes after the in-text citation. But if you don't have an in-text citation, the period should go right here where that quotation or where that comma is. Okay, so just kind of know this is how you format quotation mark stuff. And if you have questions about that, I know that was a little bit confusing and I don't have examples for everything I was explaining. Feel free to hop on the Zoom call today from 2 to 3, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or just shoot me an email. Okay, comma rule number 6. So you need to use commas or dashes. Okay, I inserted that. I know we're talking commas, but this one's interchangeable. You can use commas or dashes for this before and after what are called non-essential elements. Now, we know if information in a sentence is non-essential because you can literally take the non-essential element out of the sentence and the sentence will still make sense without it. So here's an example of what that might look like. Horseman Elementary, which is the smallest school in the district, enrolls only 106 students. So the yellow portion, which is the smallest school in the district, is the non-essential element. If we took that out of the sentence would still make sense without it. Horseman Elementary enrolls only 160 students, right? That's how we know it's non-essential. It is not essential to us understanding the sentence. So anytime you have a non-essential where you could take it out of the sentence would make sense without it, you have to put commas or dashes. Okay, you can use dashes too, but commas on both ends of the non-essential element. You cannot use a combination of commas and dashes. So we couldn't have like a dash up here and then a comma down here. It's got to be either commas on both ends or dashes on both ends, not a mixture of both. Okay, so just so you know, that's kind of what that would look like. So we're going to do some practice again. So here'd be an example of one. I was born on October 22nd, 1991 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Okay, so this one is employing a date. Okay, now we have two numbers of the date right next to each other. So they need to be separated by a comma. So you should have a comma here. And then we have a location, right? Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We know Sioux Falls is the town. South Dakota is the state. The state has to have punctuation on both sides of it. So we need a comma right here separating Sioux Falls and South Dakota. Since South Dakota comes at the end of the sentence, we don't need an additional comma here, but if we had stuff after it, then we would need another comma there, just so you guys are aware. Okay, this one, my mother always told me, clean your room, make your bed, and take out the trash. So we need a comma before the quotation mark. My mother always told me, comma, clean your room, and we have a list of items here. Okay, so we're going back to like rule number 1. Clean your room, comma, make your bed, comma, and take out the trash. So we have to make sure we put commas in between those listed items as well. South Dakota, the state with the faces, is the place I call home. So this one we have a non-essential element, and you could probably hear it when I read it out loud, right? The state with the faces is the non-essential. If we took that out of the sentence would make sense without it. South Dakota is the place I call home. Since it's non-essential, we have to offset it with punctuation on both sides. So we need a comma here after Dakota, and then we need a comma after faces. South Dakota, comma, the state with the faces, comma, is the place I call home. Okay, more rules for you. Rule number 7, we use commas to set off words or names in a direct address. So if I'm like directly talking to you, then I would need a comma around your name. So here would be an example of that. Robin, comma, have you ever been to the zoo? Okay, I'm directly addressing Robin. So when we write that out, it has to have a comma after it. Now you can have a direct address at the end of a sentence as well. Like I could say, have you ever been to the zoo, Robin? And you would still need comma, Robin, because it's still a direct address. And it doesn't always have to be names. You know, you could use like my friend or my dear or something like that. That's still a direct address, even though you're not technically saying the person's name. Rule number 8, we use commas to set off titles when they follow a person's name. And a title would be something like MD or whatever, RN, DC, BA, whatever the title the person has is. You use commas on either side of it. So Christina Lundgren, MD, will give the opening speech. So we've got to put commas around that MD. Okay, because that is their title or whatever. Now, this does not apply to like Mrs., Mr., or Ms. That you just need a period. Okay, this would be like if they earned a degree of some kind, and that's what they're just like tacking on their degree, like, hey, look at all the cool letters I have behind my name type of thing. Okay. Rule number 9, we use commas to set off tag questions. So this is kind of similar to a direct address, but a tag question emphasizes an implied answer to the statement that precedes it. So an example would be, you don't like raisins, do you? Okay, so do you is the tag question. Like, again, this is kind of borderline non-essential. Like, we don't really need it. We could take it out of the sentence and the sentence would make sense without it. We could just say, you don't like raisins, or don't you like raisins, or something like that. But the do you just adds more emphasis to the question that came before it. So we have to offset it by a comma. Okay, so more practice here. Happy birthday, Harry. So obviously we would have to put a comma before Harry because this is a direct address, right? We're talking to Harry. Hi, Harry. We're talking to Harry, so we want to put a comma before his name. I made this when I didn't have a student named Harry, but now I do. So everybody say hi to Harry. Hi, Harry. All right, this one, Dr. Jordan BC is the greatest chiropractor I know. So again, we've got the title that Dr. Jordan has. So we need to offset it by punctuation on both sides. So you need a comma after Jordan and then a comma after DC. You've never seen the Northern Lights, have you? So here we have one of those tag questions, have you? So we need a comma after lights before that tag question. That's just adding emphasis to the other question. Okay, more rules. It's like never ending, I know. So rule number 10, you use commas before and after phrases that serve as interrupters, okay? And so what interrupters are, is there any word or phrase that kind of interrupts the flow of the sentence? Like you're reading the sentence, it's flowing smoothly, and then it's like you kind of like lurch a little bit in the flow of the sentence because you have this interrupter. So here would be an example of an interrupter. Your girlfriend, to be perfectly honest, cares more for your wallet than she does for you. Okay, can you hear how that kind of interrupts the flow of the sentence when I said it? When you have something like that, you have an interrupter, you do have to have commas on both sides of the interrupter. So that's kind of how you would do that. Now, I do want to note, I don't want you to confuse interrupters with conjunctive adverbs, which join together two independent clauses, because if it comes in the middle of a sentence like this, he was, however, very successful in his math classes, you need commas on both sides. But if we were to put our conjunctive adverb in between, let's see if I have another example. Yeah, if we were to put our conjunctive adverb in between the two clauses, I like working outside, however, I also enjoy reading, you need a semicolon right here. Remember, that's one of our rules to join together two independent clauses, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma. Now, if it's functioning as an interrupter in the middle of an independent clause, then you offset it with commas on both sides. But if it comes in between two independent clauses, then you have to follow this punctuation. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. That first one's an interrupter. That second one is a conjunctive adverb. So just kind of keep your eye out for that. Basically, if you have one of these guys joining together two independent clauses, you have to make sure you have that semicolon coming before it. Rule 11, we use a comma between consecutive adjectives that are equally important in describing the same noun. And equally important is the key here, okay? And so I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for how to make sure they're equally important. So the first one, adjectives have to be of equal importance when describing a noun. So I have that sample highlighted in yellow there. By the end of the game, the field was a slippery, wet mess. Okay, so slippery and wet are both describing, they're both adjectives describing the mess. They're of equal importance. So we need to separate them with a comma. Now, how do we know they're of equal importance? Well, there's a couple things we can do. So one way to determine if they are of equal importance is you can reverse them in the sentence. So you can switch their order and it should still make sense. By the end of the game, the field was a wet, slippery mess. Like that still works. So that's one way we can check to make sure that they're still of equal importance. And then the other thing that you can do, my Bitmoji's hidden again. Well, it's just a thumbs up. But the other thing that you can do is you can insert an and between the two adjectives, and the sentence should again still make sense. By the end of the game, the field was a slippery and wet mess. Now, if you do the and there, you don't need a comma, okay? But that's just one way to check to make sure that the adjectives are of equal importance and thus do need the comma. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's some more comma practice. Her pen rolled off her desk onto the floor and right under the cabinet. Okay, so here we have a series of items again, off her desk, onto the floor, under the cabinet, right? Those are prepositional phrases telling us where the pen is rolling, so we need commas in between them. So we would need off her desk, comma, onto the floor, comma, and right under the cabinet. Okay, this one, an old bicycle, tires flat and handlebars crooked, lay in the street. Now, when I read it, you can kind of hear where the commas go, but if you were trying to figure this one out by yourself, it may not have been as obvious. But we do have an interrupter here, tires flat and handlebars crooked. Okay, that's interrupting the sentence. And it's also a non-essential. So a lot of times interrupters are non-essential. They're kind of like interchangeable, right? So it's a non-essential element. We don't need it. If we remove it from the sentence, an old bicycle lay in the creek, the sentence still makes sense. So you need to offset it by punctuation on both sides. So you need a comma after bicycle and then a comma after crooked. The musty old book opened with a poof of stale, dusty air. So here would be an example of those adjectives. So we have two adjectives, musty and old, describing book. So we need a comma between them. And then we have two adjectives, stale and dusty, describing air. So we need a comma between those as well. And those are both interchangeable, right? We could say the old musty book and a poof of dusty, stale air. So that's one of our tests. We know that they are of equal importance, thus they need commas between them. In baseball, gloves are used by the fielders. So here we have another introductory phrase, right, in baseball. So we need a comma that comes before the independent clause. Did you know there is a Kansas City, Missouri and a Kansas City, Kansas? Okay, so here we're going back a couple of rules where we have locations. So we need commas around the states. So we need to have commas on both sides of Missouri because it's in the middle of the sentence. So did you know there is a Kansas City, comma, Missouri, comma, and a Kansas City, comma, Kansas? Okay, this one's pretty challenging. I'm not going to lie to you guys. So if you haven't done it already, I want you to just like take 20 seconds and look at it. So pause me, look at it, see if you can figure it out, and then play me. So listen to me read this one, and you can probably hear where most of the commas need to go. In 1973, Sister Teresa took her final vows, which ensured that she, unlike most women, would never have a husband or family. Okay, so you can kind of hear there's a lot going on here. So first off, we've got an introductory phrase in 1937. So we need a comma right here. So in 1937, and then we've got our independent clause, Sister Teresa took her final vows. And then we've got, let's see, I got to read this again. This is hard without my answer key. Sister Teresa took her final vows. Okay, so we do need a comma after vows. And here's why. This last part, we don't need, okay? It's what's called a relative dependent clause. So it starts, and I talked to you guys about this a couple weeks ago, but it starts with a relative pronoun which, okay? And it's not necessary to the sentence. We could end the sentence after vows and it would be perfectly fine. What this is doing is it's giving us more information about those vows. So since it's kind of classified as non-essential, the dependent relative clauses, we need a comma here after vows, which ensured that she, comma, unlike most women, comma, okay, unlike most women is an interrupter, okay, it's interrupting the flow of that dependent clause, so we need commas around it, and then the rest is fine. Okay, so you need all four commas. You need one after 1937, one after vows, one after that, and then, one after she, and then one after women. A lot of commas. That one was a pretty tricky one. But again, if you kind of read these sentences out loud, you guys, a lot of times you can really hear where the commas are supposed to be if you just kind of take your time and read it slowly. Okay, so hopefully you're feeling like, yay, green face, happy about today's lesson. Make myself a little bit bigger here. So again, I will be on Zoom from 2 to 3 today. So if you guys have any questions or you want to talk through your homework or anything, feel free to jump on there. And speaking of homework, you guys do have a comma rules worksheet that I have posted on Google Classroom for you guys that you need to complete. That is due by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Okay, so make sure that you turn it in before 9 a.m. And I wanted to quickly touch on your extra credit because I'm sure some of you are wondering if I'm still doing the extra credit. Okay, remember the extra credit was if you take all of your worksheets from this unit, I post the answer keys for all of your worksheets. You have to go through, correct your worksheets with a different colored pen or pencil. Well, now a lot of our worksheets are digital, okay, because I think I only am giving you one more worksheet that's not digital, and I'm just going to have you guys like write it on a separate sheet of paper. I'm still doing the extra credit, okay? And what I'll have you guys do for this worksheet, because it is digital, is you can just go in and change the font color when you're correcting it, okay? So just like change it to red or blue or whatever color your heart desires as you're doing the corrections. So I will post the answer key for your worksheet tomorrow later in the day so you guys can go back and make those corrections. The parallelism form, obviously we didn't need to post an answer key for that because it gave you the answer. So that was one that you don't have to do. But you will need to correct the comma rules worksheet as part of your extra credit. And what I will do to have you guys like kind of turn in your extra credit if we're not back in school by Monday is I'll just have you, like we did with independent reading, just take pictures and upload it. Okay, so just kind of so you know that's coming up on the horizon. So we still do have extra credit opportunities. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. That'll also help you study for your grammar test coming up on Monday here. And then, of course, we have our daily quote. So the quote for today is from none other than the wonderful, amazing Henry David Thoreau. And this is from his book, Walden. So here it is. Live in each season as it passes. Breathe the air, drink the drink, taste the fruit, and resign yourself to the influence of the earth. And I wanted to share that one with you today because since we are so cooped up, with this quarantine, we can't really go anywhere. The one place that is still accessible to us is nature, right? We can still go outside. And I've been telling you guys every day, go outside, get some fresh air because it really helps you maintain sanity in this time when, we're supposed to be like locked indoors. But they are saying you can go outside as long as you're kind of like keeping your distance from other people. So go for a walk, go enjoy the beauty. I mean, it's been a gorgeous week, you guys. I know it's been a little bit rainy, but I mean, it's going to be beautiful this week. Okay. So go outside. Don't forget to do something that lights your soul on fire. And don't forget to reach out to friends and family via FaceTime or whatever, whatnot, what have you. Okay. Stay in touch with people. All of these things are going to get us through this. All right. Again, hop on that Zoom today if you guys have questions. Otherwise, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye. See if I can end this. How do I end this?